I remember the day we moved into the new house, down to the smallest detail, as if it was etched in my memory, like a faded photograph in which you can still see the contours of the past. It was a majestic mansion with high ceilings, massive windows, and long corridors that echoed every sound. It smelled of fresh paint and expensive furniture, but that smell couldn't drown out the emptiness that settled inside me. Dad seemed pleased. He enthusiastically talked about our new life, about the opportunities that now opened up before us, about how lucky we were to be in this house, in this neighborhood, among these people. But I looked at him and saw a shadow of worry hiding under his tired smile, and deep, impenetrable fatigue reflected in his eyes. "You'll love it here, Camila," he said as we climbed the wide staircase. "You'll have your own room, even bigger than the one you had before. And there's a pool in the courtyard. Can you imagine?" I nodded, but I didn't feel happy. Dad could have bought me a bigger room, but he couldn't bring our old life back. Before we continue, I am very curious. Which country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you are listening to us from. Enjoy listening. At first, it seemed to me that Dad really wanted everything to work out for us, that he was trying. He was attentive, checking my lessons, wondering how the day went, but his concern was somehow superficial, as if he was following a mandatory program. He could ask a question, but rarely listened to the answer. He could smile, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Most of all, I felt lonely. In the old life, Mom was always there, even if she was just sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Here, I was surrounded by silence. I used to fall asleep to her voice telling fairy tales, and now all I could see were the walls reflecting the light of the nightlight. Sometimes I tried to imagine that my mother was still there, that if I closed my eyes and listened, I would hear her humming softly to herself. But every time I opened my eyes, reality slammed into me with renewed force. Over time, I began to notice changes in Dad. If before he had tried to keep things in the usual order, now he was obsessed with work. He talked about contracts, negotiations, business expansion. His phone rang constantly, and even at dinner he could suddenly get up and leave without finishing the sentence he started. And then new people appeared. At first, I didn't even understand exactly when they started flashing in our lives, but it soon became clear to me that these were not casual acquaintances. Tall men in expensive suits, women with immaculately coiffed hair, noisy parties in the living room filled with loud laughter and clinking glasses. Sometimes I stood upstairs listening to this new world that was gradually invading our lives. "Our father is a great man, Camila," one of these women once told me when we bumped into each other on the stairs. She was smiling, but there was something slippery and unpleasant in her voice. "He has achieved a lot. You should be proud of him." I didn't know what to say. Be proud? Of course I saw that he had become rich and successful, that we now had this house, cars, and servants. But the more I delved into this new life, the more I realized that I didn't really belong in it. At school, I tried to stay away. The children here were completely different, confident, daring, as if they knew their worth from birth. They had expensive phones, designer clothes, and personal drivers. They talked about vacation trips, yachts, and private islands, and it felt like I was in some kind of alien world that would never truly accept me. "Are you new?" a girl with long blonde hair asked me once, looking at me with an appraising look. "Are you the daughter of that Mr. Hunter?" I nodded, and at that moment it seemed to me that she wasn't looking at me as a person, but as an object for discussion, as part of some story that only mattered in connection with my father. "That's cool," she finally said. "You're worth being friends with." I smiled, but my stomach clenched. I felt like I was living in someone else's life, in someone else's house, among people who saw in me only a reflection of my father. But who did he really become? Why did he change? Why did so many strangers appear next to him? I didn't know, but I felt that the answers to these questions would change everything. I looked at the menu, not knowing where to start, because all the names of the dishes sounded so pretentious, as if they were invented not for food, but for an exhibition of modern art. Mom waited patiently, brushing invisible crumbs from her immaculately manicured nails, her lips touched with a slight smile, the one that appeared whenever she wanted to show that everything was under control. But I knew it wasn't. There was anxiety in her, barely noticeable, almost invisible, but I could feel it, in the way she bit the inside of her cheek, in the way she drummed her fingers on the coffee mug, in the way she glanced at my clothes, appraisingly, as if trying to figure out how much I had changed. "Well, are you going to order, or should I choose for you?" "What is it?" she asked, cocking her head to the side, and I noticed a flicker of impatience in her voice. I poked at the first name I saw, not even trying to figure out what it was, and Mom nodded contentedly, closing the menu. The waiter, a young guy with perfectly combed hair and a silver badge on his lapel, took our orders and left, and we remained sitting opposite each other, like two people who have known each other for a long time, but are desperately trying to remember what they can talk about. "You've grown so much, Camila," Mom finally said, studying my face carefully. "I've become completely different," I shrugged, not knowing what to say to that. "Of course I've changed. How could it be otherwise?" "How was school?" "What is it?" she asked, leaning on the table and propping her chin on her hand. "It's fine," I replied, feeling an unpleasant chill run down my spine. I didn't want to talk about school. I didn't want to talk about the children who looked at me as if I was not a human being, but part of my father's successful business project. Mom sighed, but continued. "And your friends? Do you have anyone you can talk to?" I hesitated, remembering the girls from school, those who called me their friend but didn't know anything about me except my last name, those who said I was lucky to have such a father, those who smiled at me in the hallways but didn't invite me for a walk after school. I remembered once sitting at lunch surrounded by my classmates, but I felt as if I wasn't there. "I don't know," I replied evasively, lowering my gaze. Mom frowned slightly, but said nothing. At that moment, the waiter placed a plate in front of me with something obviously complicated. There were some sauces, microscopic slices of something, and a tiny sandwich that seemed like it could be eaten in one bite. I glanced at my mom, but she seemed pleased with her choice, and I had no choice but to pretend that I was satisfied with it. "How's Dad?" Mom suddenly asked, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach clench. "Okay," I replied quickly, not wanting to continue this conversation. "Does he still work day and night?" "Yes." Mom pressed her lips together, shook her head, but didn't say anything. She took a sip of coffee, looking somewhere past me, and I knew that at that moment she mentally returned to the life that we once had. "If he's too busy, Camila, you can always call me, you know, right?" "I know." "I'm serious." "I know, Mom." She nodded, but she didn't look like she fully believed me. After the cafe, we went to a boutique, and Mom insisted on buying me something stylish. I protested, but, as always, Mom was adamant. She ran her fingers over the hangers, pulling out things from the rows of clothes that she thought would suit me. At some point, she took out a short black dress, squinted, and handed it to me. "Measure it." "Mom, Dad's going to kill me." "Let him try." I rolled my eyes but took the dress and went to the fitting room. When I put it on and looked in the mirror, I suddenly felt scared. I really looked older in a different way. "Come on, come out, don't Tom," I heard my mom's voice. I opened the door a crack and stepped forward. Mom gasped. A smile spread across her face and her eyes lit up. "Oh, baby, you're gorgeous." I turned to the mirror, trying to see myself in the reflection, but there was a stranger standing there. "We'll take it," Mom said, not waiting for my answer. When Dad saw this dress later at home, he, of course, exploded. "It's a dress," I replied, pretending I didn't understand anything. "You're not going to wear this." "Why?" "Because you're just a kid, Camila. Mom said I look amazing." Mom can say anything, but I forbid it. I blushed. "Oh, so now you suddenly care?" Dad froze as if I'd hit him. He looked at me for a few seconds. I tried to smile, to pretend that I was comfortable, that I was enjoying these family dinners just as much as my mother, that I also thought Mark was a wonderful person, that I liked sitting at this perfectly set table, listening to his stories about negotiations, successes, and plans. But inside, I was squeezed by that strange, sticky emptiness. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was here by accident, that my role in this new family hadn't been spelled out yet, that I didn't fit into their perfect picture, like a blot on a blank piece of paper. Dad never hosted such dinner parties, never talked to me about his work with such passion as Mark, but he was real. I could walk into the kitchen and see him in a t-shirt with some kind of ridiculous print, with an absent-minded expression on his face while he was flipping through the morning newspaper. I could hear him swearing softly under his breath if something didn't work out, slamming his palm on the table if he was annoyed. Dad wasn't trying to create the perfect picture. He was just being himself. And Mark? He was too, right? Everything he said sounded like something out of a book called How to Be a Good Stepfather in a Week. "How was your day, Camila?" "What is it?" he asked every time at dinner, and I shrugged my shoulders. "It's fine." "Oh, come on, tell me something." "Is there anything interesting at school?" "No." "Well, at least something. New friends, teachers." I looked at him, then looked at my mother, who was watching me intently, as if hoping that I would open up, accept him, become part of their new family. But I couldn't. After one of these dinners, Mom stayed with me in the living room while Mark cleared the table, and then quietly said, "Camila, can you try it? For me?" I sighed, looked at her, so beautiful, radiant, with sparkles of happiness in her eyes, and felt that I was losing. "I'm trying," I lied. She smiled and stroked my cheek. But at home, in my real room, with books that I chose myself, with soft toys that seemed to be part of my childhood, with the smell of the house that I had known since birth, I felt safe. I didn't know how to tell my mom that I was missing something important in her new home, something that couldn't be replaced with expensive dinners, a private room, or Mark's stories. But Mom didn't give up. "Have you thought about moving?" "What is it?" she asked one day when we were sitting in the cafe where we used to go every time we met. I knew that this conversation would take place sooner or later, but I hoped to delay it as much as possible. "I do not know, Mom." "Camila, it's not a matter of life and death," she laughed, but there was tension in her voice. "Just think about it. You'll be closer to school. You won't have to be alone all the time. I'll always be there for you." "Dad's here too," I objected, looking into a cup of cooling chocolate. "You know he's always at work," Mom said, and there was bitterness in her voice. I knew it. I knew that Dad worked a lot, that he often didn't have enough time for me, that he might forget about an event at school or be late for a meeting. But I also knew something else. He tried. He came to piano concerts, even if he was sitting in the hall with his face buried in the phone. He made me pancakes in the morning, even if he sometimes over-dried them. He brought ice cream if he saw that I was sad, even if he did not know how to choose the right words. "I'll think about it," I replied, because that was the only answer that could give me a little more time. But Mom interpreted it as consent. A week later, she came in with big eyes full of hope and said that she and Mark had started to fix up my room. She told me that she had ordered furniture, that she had chosen the most comfortable bedding, that she had bought me a new desk because the old one was too small. I listened to her, and everything inside me turned cold. When I got home, Dad was sitting on the couch, barefoot, with a remote control in his hands, switching channels without much interest. He looked tired, as always, but when I sat down next to him, he immediately turned to me. "How was your day?" I shrugged my shoulders, as I always did, but then I plucked up the courage and asked quietly, "Dad, if I decide to live with my mom, will you be very upset?" He froze as if he had been hit. "Do you want to live with your mom?" "Simply, she says I'll be better off with her." Dad was silent for a long time. "What do you think?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted Dad to say no. I wanted him to say that he needed me, that he would feel bad without me. But he just smiled sadly and nodded. "If you decide to leave, I won't stop you," he said. I suddenly felt a lump rise in my throat, and I lowered my head so that he wouldn't see my eyes. "But you should know that I love you, Camila, whatever you choose." I nodded, not knowing what to say. But I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, listened to the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the house crackling, the clock ticking somewhere far away. And I realized that the choice I would make would change everything. I stood in the middle of my room, the one in which I grew up, among the familiar things that seemed to be an integral part of me, and watched as Mom and Mark fussily packed my things into boxes, took them out to the car, and animatedly discussed where best to place my books, how best to arrange the furniture in my new. I didn't know which color of the walls would suit me best, and all the while, everything inside me was clenching with pain, as if someone invisible had twisted my insides into a knot. Dad was sitting downstairs in the living room, not saying a word since I told him I was leaving. I could feel his presence, hear his uneven breathing, but I couldn't bring myself to come down, couldn't find the strength to look into his eyes, because I knew if I saw that expression on his face one more time, I wouldn't be able to leave. "That's it. I think we've got everything we need," Mom exclaimed joyfully, clapping her hands, and Mark immediately picked up. "Camila, you can't imagine how happy we are that you will finally be with us. This will be a new chapter. I promise you will like it." I nodded, but didn't say anything. Mom reached out to hug me, but I took a step back. I want to say goodbye to Dad," I whispered, and for a moment there was something strange and uncertain in her eyes, but then she nodded. I slowly went downstairs, step by step, as if each step took away my strength, and when I entered the living room, Dad was still sitting in an armchair, staring at one point, his hands clenched into fists, and his jaw was tense, as if he was fighting with himself, not allowing emotions to get the better of him. "Dad?" I said softly, but he didn't look up. I stepped closer, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Dad, It's okay, Camila," he said in a surprisingly even voice, but there wasn't a drop of his usual warmth in it. "You've made your choice." I froze. "You know that doesn't mean—" "Of course," he interrupted, and finally looked at me. "You're going to live with your mom now. Everything is clear." His face was stony, but there was pain in his eyes, so intense that I wanted to burst into tears right there in front of him, in front of this whole situation. But I just clenched my fists tighter, trying to cope with the overwhelming feeling of guilt. "I'll come. I'll call. I'll—" "Of course," he repeated again, but now there was bitterness in his voice. I took a step forward, hoping that he would get up, that he would hug me, that he would say something, but he remained sitting, not even moving. "Okay," I breathed, realizing that if I stayed here even a minute longer, I wouldn't be able to leave. I turned around and headed for the door, but when I had my hand on the handle, he suddenly said softly, "I'll always be here, Camila." I didn't turn around. When I got into the car, I felt like everything was burning inside, as if I was bursting from the inside. But my mother chatted nonstop, telling me about the plans, how wonderful everything would turn out, how wonderful we would spend time together, and Mark agreed with her. And I looked out the window and saw our house slowly disappearing around a bend, and with it, a part of me. The first night in the new house, I couldn't sleep. The room, though beautiful and spacious, seemed alien to me. Everything was too perfect, too neat, smelled of new furniture and fresh paint, but it didn't smell like home. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and that last conversation with Dad replayed over and over in my head. I picked up the phone and stared at his number for a long time before dialing. 1 ring, 2, 3, and suddenly he dropped it. I dialed again, but this time he just didn't pick up. The next day, my mother gave me a real celebration. She set the table with my favorite dishes, brought gifts, and talked all evening about what wonderful changes were waiting for us, how we would go on vacation, how we would go to the theater, and how we would organize family evenings. I nodded, smiled, pretended to be happy, but inside, everything was empty. A week has passed, then 2. I wrote to Dad, but he replied in monosyllables, without emotion. I called. He rarely picked up the phone, and if he did, the conversation was short and dry. I told my mom that I wanted to see him, but every time she found a reason why, it was impossible. "Honey, give him some time. It's hard for him, you know?" She spoke softly, stroking my shoulder. But I didn't understand. One evening, I couldn't stand it and just left. I didn't tell my mom where I was going. I didn't pick up my phone. I didn't think that she would probably panic. I just walked through the streets until I found myself at our house. The only light was on in the study. I rang the doorbell. A long silence. I was about to leave, but suddenly the door opened and Dad stood in front of me. He looked tired, overgrown, with dark circles under his eyes and a stretched t-shirt, and for a moment I even thought he was sick. "Camila?" His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "Dad." And then I couldn't stand it. I rushed to him, hugged him as tightly as I could, and this time he didn't stay still. His arms closed around me and he pulled me to him, and I felt his breathing hitch, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry," I whispered, burying my face in his t-shirt, inhaling the familiar scent that always calmed me. "Hush, honey, it's okay." He stroked my back. His voice was quiet, but there was so much pain in it, so much relief, that I cried even harder. We stood there until I felt like I could breathe. "You have to come back. Mom's probably going crazy," he finally said, but I shook my head. "I want to stay here." He looked at me, studying me, as if trying to figure out if I'd really said that. "Okay," he replied softly, stepping back to let me inside. I took a step forward, stepped over the threshold, and at that moment I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt at home. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like something was wrong. The house was too quiet, too empty, and even the warm glow of the nightlight couldn't dispel this strange feeling of unease that had been clinging to me like a sticky fog for weeks. I lay listening to the sounds, to the faint crackling of the walls, to the sound of a distant siren outside the window, to the creaking of the house that should have been mine now, but never became. I got out of bed, pulled on a hoodie over my pajamas, and tiptoed out of the room. It was dark in the hallway, and I suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt like a real stranger in this place. I walked down the stairs slowly, trying not to make any noise, but when I came down, I saw that the light was on in the living room. Quiet voices. I froze, not moving, not breathing. "This is a bad idea, Lisa." Mark's voice sounded tired, but there was steel in it. "You can't take any chances right now." "It's not a risk, Mark." Mom's voice was strained, slightly trembling, but there was stubbornness in it, the same stubbornness with which she always got her way. "It's a necessity. The judge may not decide in your favor. If Camila, she'll do what needs to be done," Mom interrupted. There was silence. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I felt a chill. Something inside me told me that this conversation was about me. "I don't want to put pressure on her," Mom said after a moment, but her voice wasn't so sure. "What have you been doing these last few months?" Mark chuckled. "Lisa, be honest. You wanted her to choose you. You made her choose you. Because it's better this way." There was a fervor in her voice. "Because I know it's the right thing for her." "And if she doesn't want it?" There was another silence, and in it I heard everything I needed to know. I took a cautious step back, then another. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay here. Couldn't pretend everything was okay anymore. Couldn't force myself to be a part of this perfect picture my mom had painted. I turned around and ran up the stairs to my room, to my pretend shelter, slammed the door and leaned my back against it. I was shaking. I was breathing fast, hard, like I'd run a marathon. I knew that Mom was always strong, always achieved what she wanted, but I never thought she could go that far. She was really trying to make me her own, lock me in this new life. But it wasn't my life. I collapsed onto the bed, curled into a ball, clenching my fists. I couldn't pretend everything was okay anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a clear decision that finally freed me from the burden that had been weighing on me for the past few months. I knew where I needed to go. I went downstairs, trying to look as calm as possible, and entered the kitchen, where my mother was already sitting at the table, gently stirring coffee with a spoon. She looked tired, but she smiled at me when I walked in. "Good morning, honey," she said, and then she looked at me carefully. "You're looking thoughtful today." I took a deep breath before I spoke. "Mom, I want to go back to Dad." Her hand with the spoon paused over the cup. "What?" "I want to go home," I repeated. And for the first time in a long time, I really knew what I was saying. There was a long pause, so tense that the air in the room seemed heavy. "Camila," Mom's voice was quiet, but I could hear the pent-up anger in it. "You do understand that this is impossible, right?" "Why?" Because it's the wrong decision." "But it's my decision." I looked her straight in the eye. She pursed her lips, then slowly pushed the cup away and folded her hands in front of her. "He convinced you, didn't he?" "What?" There was something venomous in her voice, something I'd never heard before. "He's manipulating you, Camila. He's always been good at it. He made you doubt. No, Mom," I shook my head. "You made me doubt it. You've confused me. You made me think that if I didn't choose you, you'd be unhappy. It's not like that." "That's exactly it," I exclaimed, and suddenly tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending that I'm happy here, that I want to be a part of your new life, that I'm happy. I love you, Mom, I really do, but I can't be the person you want me to be." She stared at me, her chest heaving, but she didn't say a word. I turned away. "I'm leaving." I turned around, heading for the stairs to pack my things, but her voice stopped me. "If you leave, Camila." I turned around. "If you leave now, you won't be able to come back." Her eyes were bright, but her voice was firm. I froze. Did she really say that? My mom? "Are you serious?" She didn't answer. I suddenly felt like something inside of me was finally breaking down. "Okay," I said, not recognizing my own voice. "Good. Bye then." I went up the stairs, packed my things as quickly as I could, clutched the phone in my hands, and called. Dad answered on the first ring. "Dad, pick me up. I'm on my way." When I went outside with my bag in my hand, Mom was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't try to stop me. She was just watching. Dad's car stopped at the curb. I went to the door, but before I sat down, I took one last look at my mom. She wasn't crying. Me too. I got in the car, slammed the door, and looked in the rearview mirror as Dad pulled away. Mom was still standing there, but I didn't turn around. I was sitting in the center of this tense world, surrounded by the walls of the courtroom where my fate was being decided, feeling everything inside me twist into a tight knot as the air became thick and heavy, as Mom's gaze, full of expectation, bored into me, as Dad's eyes, tired but full of love, looked from the other end of the room, as if they were trying to say without words, "You're not alone." The judge's voice sounded distant, as if he was not deciding human lives, but simply reading out another formal document. He said something about stability, about the best conditions for a child, and that historically, a mother is more likely to receive custody, especially if she has a stable marriage, income, and good housing conditions. I saw how my mother nodded proudly, smiling slightly. How Mark sat next to me with a stony face, as if this hearing was just an annoying formality for him. How my mother's lawyer confidently built a picture of the perfect house, the perfect family, the ideal future that I had ahead of me. But I knew the truth. I knew that behind this illusion there were cold calculations, that I was just a tool for them, a means to get money from Dad, a convenient addition to a family portrait that could be hung in the living room, but no more. And I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Your Honor," my voice sounded unexpectedly loud, interrupting the speech of my mother's lawyer, and a tense silence hung in the hall. Everyone turned to me. I met my mom's gaze, and her confidence wavered. I saw it in the way she tensed a little, as her lips twitched. "I want to say something," I continued, feeling a surge of determination rise inside me that I hadn't felt before. The judge frowned, exchanged glances with the lawyers, then nodded. "Okay, Camila," he said. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "I want to live with Dad." These words sounded in complete silence, as if they had exploded in the air, and I saw my mother's expression change from confident to tense as her fingers clenched into fists, as Mark rolled his eyes like an irritated child who had just been denied sweets. "Camila, dear," my mother began, but I didn't let her finish. "No, Mom," I said firmly. "I know you wanted the best for me, but you never asked me what I wanted." I felt my hands shaking, but I didn't stop. I heard you and Mark talking about me that night, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I know that for you, I am just a source of income, a convenient figure in your new, beautiful life. Mom turned pale. Camila, this is some kind of misunderstanding. No, Mom, I interrupted again. It's true. I heard everything. About how you want to get full custody in order to get more money. About how Mark said he didn't like my presence, that you were thinking of sending me to boarding school as soon as you get what you want. It was so quiet in the hall that one could almost hear the tension in the air. I looked at the judge. I don't want to live in a place where I'm not loved, I said, and felt my chest tighten with all the emotions I'd been holding in for so long. I want to go home. There was a pause. Dad sat there, not saying a word all the time, but there was such pain and hope in his eyes that I was afraid. The judge exhaled and put his hands on the table. Camila, are you sure about your decision? I nodded. Yes. There was another moment of silence, and then he turned to the lawyers, looked at his mother, who was sitting with a frozen face, and then said in a flat voice, "In that case, taking into account the opinion of the minor and the circumstances presented, I decide to leave custody to my father." I heard my mom inhale sharply. I heard her nails scratching on the wooden table. I heard Mark sigh heavily, but it was all somewhere far away, muffled, unimportant, because at that moment I was looking only at Dad. He raised his head. He looked at me, and his eyes suddenly filled with tears. He didn't say a word, but I didn't need to hear anything. I took off and rushed to him. He immediately picked me up, hugged me as tightly as he could, and in that hug there was everything: pain, fear, despair, joy, relief. "You're home, Camila," he whispered. "Everything will be fine now." I squeezed him even tighter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I couldn't believe it was over. When the judge pronounced her decision, it sounded as if someone had finally removed heavy chains from me, as if I could finally take a deep breath. There was silence in the hall, but it wasn't just silence. It was the silence before the storm, before the realization, before the moment when everything falls into place. I looked at my mom. She sat as if petrified, her face frozen in some kind of strange grimace, lips slightly parted, eyes widened, but there were no tears in them. There was no despair, only anger mixed with shock. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, were clenched into fists so tightly that the knuckles turned white. But she didn't say anything. Next to her, Mark looked even paler than a minute ago, as if he was calculating in his head what this trial would cost him now. I couldn't take my eyes off their faces. They're lost. But why didn't I feel joy? Why was it still so hard inside? Dad. I turned to him and saw how his shoulders, which had been tense all this time, were now slumped. How he took a deep breath. How he closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was afraid that this was a dream, that now the judge would suddenly change his mind and everything would go back. But when he looked at me again, I saw more than just relief in his gaze. There was something in his eyes that I had been looking for so long. Love. Absolutely. The one that is not measured in money, is not used as a tool, is not replaced by convenience. I took a step forward, but at that moment, Mom stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," her voice cracked, and she glanced at the judge, but the judge didn't even look at her. "That's ridiculous." Mark quickly tugged on her arm, as if trying to lead her out of the hall before she could make a scene, but Mom pulled away. She looked at me. "Camila, is that really what you want?" Her voice was trembling, but there was no regret or pleading in it, but a strange bitterness. I took a deep breath. "Yes, Mother." For a second, something like pain flashed in her eyes, but then she straightened up, nodded coldly, and without saying another word, turned around and left. Mark followed her, muttering to himself. I watched them go. I didn't know if I'd see her again. Dad was there in an instant. I felt him hug me, tightly, so tightly, as if he was afraid that if he loosened his grip, I would disappear. I clutched his jacket, buried my face in his shoulder, and at that moment, The walls still surrounding us, people muttering around us, the hum of voices, everything disappeared. It was just him. "We're going home, Camila," he whispered, and I nodded. I didn't think I'd ever feel like I was there again. When we left the courthouse, the air was cool, but I suddenly felt light, as if the weight I had been carrying around for the last few months had finally disappeared. Dad touched my hand carefully, as if he was afraid that I would suddenly change my mind, but I tightened my grip on his fingers in response, making it clear that I no longer had any doubts. We drove home in silence. I looked out the window, watching the familiar streets rush past the glass, as houses, people, cars run past, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious. Dad occasionally glanced at me briefly, but he didn't ask anything, didn't push, didn't try to talk about what had happened. He was just there. When the car finally stopped at our house, I suddenly realized how long it had been since I'd seen it like this, illuminated by streetlights, with peeling paint on the doors, with a car parked crookedly at the curb. And it was perfect. I opened the door and went out, breathing in the night air. The house smelled just like I remembered. Not sterile expensive furniture, not new paint, not artificial fragrances. He smelled cozy. Dad followed me in and stood watching me as I looked around, as I slowly ran my hand along the banister of the stairs, as I inhaled the air of the kitchen, as I looked at the photographs still standing on the shelf by the fireplace. "Are you hungry?" "What is it?" he finally asked, and I suddenly laughed. "I'm dying," I said honestly. He grinned and went into the kitchen, and I followed him. While he was taking some groceries out of the fridge, I sat down at the table, watching him, watching how he cooks something simple with his usual movements, how his shoulders are not as tense as before, and how he occasionally smiles to himself. "I'm glad you're back," he said suddenly, without looking up. "Me too, Dad," I replied, and at that moment I realized that for the first time in a long time, I had said it completely sincerely. We ate right in the kitchen, laughing, talking, remembering something funny, discussing all sorts of nonsense, and it seemed to me that I had regained that part of myself that was lost. Later that night, lying in my bed, in my room, in my house, I felt as calm as I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew it would be difficult ahead. I knew that my relationship with my mom would never be the same. I knew that I would have to rebuild everything that had been destroyed over the years. But I was at home, and that was enough. It's been several years since I last saw my mom, when her fingers clutched my arm and those words came out of her mouth, cold as a knife blade. Then, at that moment, they burned through me from the inside, leaving an invisible mark that seemed to never disappear. But now I understand that on that day, I did not lose, but on the contrary, gained freedom, the opportunity to breathe, to live without fear, without the eternal feeling that I need to meet someone's expectations. That's expectations. I will not say that the path to this realization was easy. It was long, winding, full of doubts, pain, broken illusions, and attempts to reassemble myself, step by step, without a map and clear landmarks. But Dad was always there. He didn't try to glue me together. He didn't try to tell me that everything would be fine. He didn't make empty promises. He was just there, present, listening, supporting, and sometimes, when it was especially hard for me, he just sat silently next to me, and that was enough. When he suggested family therapy, I rolled my eyes at first, saying that we could handle it anyway, that it wasn't necessary. But after a few sessions, I realized how many unspoken words there were between the two of us, how much pain we didn't dare to voice to each other, afraid to make it even more painful. We learned to speak, listen, and understand, and gradually, day by day, our bond grew stronger. My grandparents also became a real support for me. Their house was always a refuge for me, a place where it smelled like apple pie, where they didn't ask unnecessary questions, but always listened, where at any moment I could bury my face in my grandmother's shoulder or go with my grandfather to the garden just to be a little quiet. I started to come back to myself. At school, I threw myself into my studies, the debate club, volunteer programs, everything that gave me the opportunity to feel busy, useful, and meaningful. Standing on the podium in front of the audience, proving my point of view, I suddenly felt that I had a voice, that I could speak, I could be heard, that I no longer needed to be that quiet girl who was afraid to say what she wanted. I didn't expect anything special for my 18th birthday, but Dad gave me a gift that I will never forget. It was an album, thick leather with gold lettering on the cover. When I opened it, my fingers trembled. There were photos inside that I thought were lost forever. I saw myself, very tiny, sitting on Dad's shoulders on the beach. Saw my mother laughing at the Christmas matinee. Saw us all when we were still a family. There were moments that I had already begun to forget, days that seemed just ordinary as a child. But now, from the height of time, they looked priceless. "I thought you'd want them back," Dad said quietly, watching me flip through the pages. I couldn't speak. I just threw my arms around his neck, clutching the album in my hands, and felt tears running down my cheeks. I'm 20 now. I'm in college, studying psychology, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I would follow this path, I would have just laughed. But it seems to me that it was always inevitable. My own experience, my pain, my past, all this has become the fuel for my desire to help those who find themselves in a similar situation. I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt. I don't want children to become weapons in their parents' wars, to be used, to live with the idea that they're not good enough, that their love needs to be earned. I started participating in conferences on the rights of children in divorce proceedings. I tell my story, and sometimes when I look into the audience, I see someone nodding, someone wiping away a tear, someone hanging on every word because it resonates in their own lives. Dad comes to every performance of mine. He sits in the front row, and sometimes when I talk about how far we've come, how difficult it was, but how we managed, I notice him stealthily wiping away a tear. As for Mom, I haven't spoken to her since that day in court. Sometimes I think about texting her to call to see her, but then I remember her face, her words, that cold look, and I realize that I'm not ready yet. Maybe one day, maybe not. But right now, I'm focused on something else. My future, my healing, becoming the person I want to be, not the person they tried to make me. My life is not perfect. I still struggle with insecurity. I still have trust issues, and there are still nights when I have nightmares from the past. But now I know that I'm not alone anymore. Now I know that I am loved not for what I can give, not for what role I play in someone's life, but simply for who I am. And that's enough.